The last letter I wrote to my son was stained with my tears, the ink smudging as I begged him to come home. I sat at my kitchen table, the creak of the old wooden chair echoing in the silence of that winter after he left. Each word I wrote was a lifeline, a desperate thread of love woven with hope and heartbreak, imagining his hands, those same hands that once clung to mine during our summers by the lake, tearing open the envelope. But they never did. The letters piled up, unopened, returned to me with a stranger's handwriting scrawled across them, each one a dagger to my heart. I didn't know then that those pages would become my silent screams, my prayers for a son who'd become a ghost. The pain wasn't just in the silence, it was in the questions that clawed at me. Why did he turn away? Was it something I did, or something life did to him? There's a bitter ache in that uncertainty, a bruise I can't stop pressing, yet a flicker of defiance kept me writing, even when the envelopes came back marked, "Return to sender." What broke us? That's the question that haunts me, the thread I'm unraveling in this raw, messy story of love and loss. There's something I haven't told you yet, something about that last letter that changed everything. I'm sharing this because I need you to feel the weight of those unopened words, to understand why I couldn't stop writing, even when it hurt. If this story stirs something in you, if you've ever loved someone who slipped away, leave a comment with your own story. Hit that like button, subscribe, and let's hold space for the heartbreak that connects us all. The first letter to my son, Elliot, was a confession I wasn't ready to face, a jagged thing clawing its way out of me. The kitchen was a frozen tableau, winter's light slicing through frost on the window, turning the air sharp as a blade. I sat at the table, its wood scarred from years of coffee rings and careless knives, my pen trembling like my pulse as I wrote his name. Elliot, in slow, deliberate strokes. 6 months ago he'd stormed out, the door slamming behind him, his backpack slung over one shoulder like a shield. Our fight had been a wildfire, my words too sharp, his eyes too broken, glittering with something I couldn't name. Anger, shame, or maybe just the weight of being 19 and lost. I thought this letter could stitch us back together, mend the tear I'd made. I wrote of Lake Huron, where we'd spent summers building sandcastles, his small hands trusting mine as we shaped towers that crumbled under the waves. His laughter had been a bright, wild thing, echoing across the water, and I poured that memory onto the page, hoping nostalgia might soften the edges of wherever he'd gone. My fingers shook as I folded the letter, the paper crisp against my skin, and sealed the envelope with a whispered prayer. "Please, Elliot, read this." The words felt like a spell, fragile and desperate, as if ink could pull him back across the miles. The post office was a fluorescent hum, the clerk's bored stare pinning me like a bug. I slid the envelope across the counter, feeling foolish, like I was mailing my soul to a void. Her fingers brushed mine, cold and indifferent, as she stamped it and tossed it into a bin. I drove home, the car's heater wheezing, my mind replaying that last fight, my voice cutting, calling him reckless, his silence louder than any shout. Had I pushed him too far? The question coiled in my gut, heavy as stone. Every morning after, I checked the mailbox, my breath hitching at every empty slot. The frost on the grass crunched under my boots, the world too quiet, as if it knew something I didn't. Days bled into a week, then 2, and the silence grew heavier, a weight crushing my hope. I'd stand there, fingers numb, staring at the empty box, imagining his hands, those same hands that once clung to mine, tearing open the envelope, his eyes tracing my words. But nothing came. No letter, no call, no sign he'd even seen it. I didn't know then that this letter held a secret I hadn't faced, a truth buried in the fight that drove him away. I'd screamed about his drinking, his late nights, but I hadn't seen the shadow in his eyes, the one that flickered when he said, "You don't get it, Mum." What didn't I get? The question haunted me, a ghost in the quiet house. That letter wasn't just a plea. It was a mirror, reflecting my failure to listen when he needed me most. And as the silence stretched, I began to wonder if it wasn't just Elliot who'd left, but the part of me that knew how to reach him. The kitchen table became my confessional, its surface a map of scars, coffee stains, knife scratches, and now the jagged loops of my handwriting. I wrote another letter to Elliot, then another, each one a plea to undo the night I broke us. 6 months back, the air had crackled with my anger, my voice slicing through him, reckless, ungrateful, not seeing the way his shoulders slumped, his eyes dark with something deeper than defiance. I'd thought I was saving him from himself, from the bottles he hid, but I'd only pushed him out the door. Now the silence of his absence was a blade, and I was bleeding. I wrote of firefly hunts, summer nights when he was small, chasing their glow across the backyard, his grin a beacon in the dark. Those memories spilled out, raw and aching, as if I could remind him of the mother he'd loved before I became the one he fled. The neighbors' whispers followed me now, their pitying glances at the grocery store. Poor woman, abandoned, cutting deeper than I'd let on. I'd nod, smile tight, but their words clung like damp rot, making the house feel emptier. One night, I found a photo tucked in a drawer, Lake Huron's shore behind us, Elliot's arms slung around me, his smile so wide it cracked my heart open. I traced his face, wondering when he'd stopped being that boy. The fight replayed in my head, my voice shrill, accusing him of throwing his life away, his silence heavy, final, before he grabbed his backpack and left. I wrote about it, my pen digging into the paper, confessing how I'd screamed without listening, how I hadn't seen his pain. But I tore that letter up, the words too raw, like exposing a wound to salt air. The mailbox was a daily ritual now, my boots crunching on frost, my breath clouding as I opened it, hoping for anything, a scrawled note, a sign he'd read my letters. But it stayed empty, and the question gnawed. Had he even gotten them, or were they lost in some postal limbo, like me? I'd sit at the table, the house creaking around me, and wonder what I'd missed that night. His eyes had held something, guilt, maybe, or fear, when he said, "You don't get it, Mum." I'd brushed it off, too angry to hear. The silence was a living thing, curling around my heart, tightening with each empty day. I wrote another letter, softer this time, begging him to come home, to talk, to let me understand. But as I sealed it, doubt crept in. Was he ignoring me, or had he vanished into a life I couldn't reach? The photo of us stared back, his grin a ghost I couldn't catch. What had I done to make him hate me? The question burned, an ember I couldn't extinguish, and I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. It felt like peeling back skin to find something rotten underneath, something I'd failed to see when he was still mine. It was a grey Tuesday when the first letter came back, unopened, the words, "Return to sender," stamped in red like a slap. A stranger's handwriting scrawled an address I didn't know, jagged and careless, and my knees buckled on the porch, the envelope slipping from my hands. I'd poured my heart into those pages, memories of Lake Huron, of Elliot's laughter, and now they were back, untouched, mocking me. The frost bit my fingers as I stood there, the world tilting, the silence louder than ever. I tore open the envelope, desperate for a clue, but found only my own words, accusing me of failure. The stranger's address ironed into my mind, an hour away, in a part of town where hope went to die. I drove there, the car's heater sputtering, my heart pounding like a trapped thing. The apartment complex was a crumbling husk, reeking of stale beer and regret, windows boarded up like closed eyes. I knocked, my breath shallow, and a man answered, his face hard, eyes glinting with suspicion. "Elliot? Moved out months ago," he said, his voice flat. I begged for more. Where? When? Why? But he shrugged, slamming the door in my face. The drive home was a blur, the road smeared with rain and my own tears. I sat at the kitchen table, the frost on the window a cruel mirror to my numbness. Who was this stranger who'd sent my letter back? Why had Elliot given me a lie of an address? I wrote again, my pen digging into the paper, anger spilling out. "Why won't you answer me, Elliot? What did I do?" The words were blood on the page, raw and reckless, but I mailed it anyway, needing him to feel my pain. The house felt like a tomb now, every creak a reminder of his absence. I kept seeing his eyes from that last fight, the way they'd flickered with something I hadn't understood, hurt, maybe, or a secret he couldn't share. The stranger's handwriting haunted me, a scrawl that felt like a warning, a door slammed shut. I checked the mailbox again, my boots sinking into the snow, but it was empty, always empty. The silence was a blade, cutting deeper each day, and I wondered if he was even alive. That night, I dreamed of him, standing on Lake Huron's shore, his back to me, the waves swallowing his voice. I woke with a scream caught in my throat, the stranger's address empanning in my mind. What had Elliot run to, or from? The question was a splinter, lodged deep, and I couldn't pull it out. If someone you loved vanished without a word, how did you keep breathing? Share your story below. I'm barely holding on. I needed to know I wasn't alone, that someone else had survived this kind of loss, this kind of silence that felt like drowning. In my dreams, Elliot's voice called Mum, soft and boyish, like he was still the kid who chased fireflies. But morning broke the spell, leaving me in an empty house, the unopened letters piling up like ghosts on the kitchen table. The frost clung to the windows, a brittle cage, and I felt it closing in, the silence a weight I couldn't shake. I needed to hear him, to know he was still out there, but all I had was the echo of his absence. I called his friend Jake, my voice tight, hoping for a scrap of news. His silence was a wall, his "haven't seen him in a year" cutting like glass. I hung up, the phone heavy in my hand, and went to Elliot's room, untouched since he left. Under his bed, I found his sketchbook, its pages filled with stormy seas and faceless figures screaming into the void. Had he been trying to tell me something? The drawings were raw, jagged, like wounds, and I traced them, my heart stuttering at the pain he'd hidden. I wrote another letter, my pen shaking, apologizing for every sharp word, for not seeing the shadow in his eyes during our fight. I should have listened, Elliot. I'm sorry. Tears smudged the ink, blurring my confession. But I sealed it anyway, needing him to know I'd failed him. At the post office, the clerk's pitying look burned, her "back again," a needle under my skin. I mailed the letter, but the act felt hollow, like shouting into a storm. Late at night, I searched his name online, the blue glow of the screen stinging my eyes. Every dead-end result, old social media, a high school art contest, tightened the knot in my chest. Was he still alive, or had he slipped into a darkness I couldn't reach? The sketchbook's images haunted me, those faceless figures like shadows of the boy I'd lost. I kept seeing his face from that last night, the way he'd flinched when I called him reckless, his eyes holding a secret I'd been too angry to see. The house creaked around me, each sound a taunt, and I wondered if he'd ever read my letters, or if they were rotting in some forgotten mailbox. The fear was a living thing now, curling around my heart, whispering that I'd lost him forever. I sat at the table, the frost outside glowing under the moon, and stared at the sketchbook, its pages a map of his pain. What had I missed? The question was a pulse, relentless, driving me to keep writing, keep searching, even as the silence screamed louder than I could bear. Was he out there? Or had I lost him to something darker than silence? I needed to believe he was still mine, but the truth felt like a tide, pulling me under. The letter came back like a blow, unopened, a note taped to it in stark black ink. Stop writing. He's gone. The words hit like a fist, and I collapsed on the kitchen floor, the paper crumpling in my hands, my breath ragged. The frost on the window seemed to pulse, mocking me as I stared at the note, its cruelty burning like acid. He's gone. The phrase echoed, splintering my heart, and I wondered if it meant gone from me or gone from the world. I sat there, the cold tile biting through my jeans, reading the note again, searching for a lie, a mistake. Who had written it? The handwriting wasn't Elliot's. It was too sharp, too final. I called the number scrawled beneath it, my hands shaking so hard I misdialed twice. A robotic voice answered, "This number is disconnected," and I laughed, a broken sound, because of course it was. The silence was a game now, taunting me, and I was losing. I drove back to the apartment complex, the road blurring through my tears, the air thick with the stench of despair. I pounded on doors, my voice raw until a neighbor, a woman with tired eyes, said Elliot had left with a girl, someone troubled, her face shadowed with secrets. A girl. The words were a lifeline and a wound, and I clung to them, needing to believe he was still alive, still reachable. I wrote to her, my pen slashing the page, begging to know if he was safe, my words spilling like blood, frantic and unhinged. That night, I dreamed of Elliot, drowning in one of his sketchbook seas, his hands reaching for me, his face dissolving into foam. I woke screaming his name, the house swallowing the sound, leaving me alone with the note's echo. He's gone. I clutched the letter, its edges cutting my palms, and wondered what I'd done to make him vanish. The fight replayed, my voice accusing, his eyes flinching, holding a pain I hadn't seen. Had I driven him to this girl, to this darkness? The kitchen table was a graveyard now, littered with unopened letters, each one a piece of my heart returned to me. I stared at the note, its words a verdict, and felt the weight of every choice I'd made, every shout, every missed sign. What would you do if you thought the person you love was in danger? How far would you go to save them? Tell me in the comments. I'm falling apart. I needed to know how to keep going, how to breathe when the truth felt like a noose. The frost outside glowed, cold and unyielding, and I wrote again, not knowing if my words would ever reach him, or if they'd only deepen the silence that was breaking me. Her name was Lena, unearthed from an old email Elliot hadn't deleted, a relic of a password he'd used since high school. She was the shadow behind his absence, the key to the silence that was choking me. I sat at the kitchen table, the frost on the window a faint glow. my laptop's light carving harsh lines across my face. Lena's name felt like a splinter, sharp and lodged deep, and I knew she held the truth about where my son had gone. Her social media was a labyrinth, dark photos of rain-slick streets, cryptic captions about running from ghosts. One post, half buried, showed a diner at dusk, her silhouette blurred, and I wondered if Elliot was just out of frame. I messaged her, my fingers trembling on the keys. "Where is my son? Is he safe?" The words felt like a plea to a stranger who'd stolen him. Hours later, her reply blinked onto the screen, cold as ice. "He's with me. He doesn't want you. Stop." Each word was a blade, cutting through the hope I'd clung to. I found a photo of them, Lena's arm possessive around Elliot's waist, his eyes hollow, not the boy who'd laughed at Lake Huron. His face was a stranger's, gaunt and shadowed, and my chest tightened, fear mixing with anger. What had she done to him? I wrote another letter, this time to both of them, my voice softer, pleading for one call, one chance to understand. "I'm still your mother, Elliot. I love you." The words felt like a lifeline, but as I sealed the envelope, doubt crept in. Would they even read it? The house was a hollow shell, the silence thicker now, heavy with Lena's words. I kept seeing that photo, her grip on him, his empty gaze. Had she pulled him into her darkness, or had he gone willingly? The question gnawed, relentless, and I scoured her posts again, finding a mention of a coastal town, a place of salt and storms. It was a thread, thin but real, and I clung to it, needing to believe I could still reach him. I lay awake, the frost outside glowing under a sliver of moon, and thought of our last fight. His flinch when I'd called him reckless, his silence screaming something I hadn't heard. Lena's reply echoed, "He doesn't want you." Was it true, or was she protecting him from me? The uncertainty was a tide, pulling me under, and I wondered what she'd seen in him that I'd missed. The kitchen table held my letters, each one a piece of my heart, and I wrote again, not knowing if my words would find him or drown in the silence that was swallowing us both. I drove through rain-soaked back roads, chasing Lena's shadow, my car's hum, the only sound louder than my heartbeat. The frost had thawed, but the world felt colder, each mile a step deeper into Elliot's absence. I'd found a lead, a coastal town mentioned in Lena's posts, and I followed it, my hands tight on the wheel, the road blurring like my hope. I couldn't stop, not when every unanswered letter felt like a door slamming shut. At a seedy motel, neon buzzing in the dusk, the clerk squinted at my photo of Elliot, his sketchbook tucked under my arm. "Yeah, saw a couple like that," he said, scratching his neck. "Left in a hurry, didn't say where." His words were a spark, faint but alive, and I clung to them, imagining Elliot's lanky frame in the parking lot, Lena beside him. I drove to a coffee shop from one of her photos, the air thick with espresso and regret. The barista, a girl with tired eyes, remembered Lena, alone, tears streaking her mascara, muttering about mistakes. Where was Elliot? In the car, I wrote another letter, my hands cramped from gripping the wheel, promising I'd never stop looking. "I love you, Elliot. Come home." The words were a prayer, scrawled under a flickering streetlight. But as I sealed the envelope, doubt gnawed harder. A cop pulled me over for speeding, his flashlight harsh in my eyes. "You okay, Mom?" he asked, his voice softening when I sobbed about my son. He let me go with a warning, his pity a weight I couldn't shake. Back home, another letter returned, its postmark smudged from that coastal town, Port Haven, a nowhere place of salt and storms. I stared at it, the red returned to sender like blood on the page, and felt the silence tighten around me. The kitchen was a cage now, the table littered with letters, each one a piece of my heart sent back unopened. I kept seeing Elliot's face from our fight, his eyes shadowed with something I hadn't understood. Guilt, maybe, or fear. Every dead end was a wound, raw and bleeding, but stopping meant losing him for good. I drove again, the road a ribbon of black under a starless sky, Lena's photo haunting me, her arm around him, his gaze empty. What had drawn him to her? The question was a pulse, driving me forward, even as the silence screamed louder. The house waited, empty, the frost gone, but the cold deeper, seeping into my bones. I wrote another letter, not knowing if it would reach him, but needing to believe he was still out there, still mine, even as the shadows grew longer. In Elliot's sketchbook, tucked between pages of stormy seas, a note in his jagged handwriting stopped my heart. "I'm sorry, Mum. I can't come back." The words were a knife, twisting deep, and I sat at the kitchen table, the spring air soft but useless against my grief. The frost was gone, but the house felt colder, the silence a living thing that swallowed me whole. His apology was a wound, raw and unexpected, and I didn't know what it meant. I read it again, tears blurring the ink, searching for a clue in his scrawl. Why was he sorry? What kept him away? I called his old art teacher, Mrs. Klein, her voice heavy with regret. "Elliot was spiraling before he left," she said. "Talked about guilt, about needing to escape something." Her words hung in the air, heavy as the sketchbook in my hands, its pages screaming with faceless figures and churning waves. I wrote a letter, my anger flaring. "What are you sorry for, Elliot? Why can't you face me?" The pen dug into the paper, my heart pounding with questions I couldn't answer. An old voicemail from him surfaced on my phone, buried in deleted messages I'd recovered. His voice was shaky, barely his. "Mom, I love you, but I need space." It was from a year ago, before the fight, before he vanished. I played it again, his words a ghost in the quiet house, and felt the weight of my failure. I'd called him reckless, screamed about his drinking, but I hadn't seen the shadow in his eyes, the one Mrs. Klein had glimpsed. The sketchbook's final drawing was a door, half open to darkness, its edges sharp as a warning. What was he running from? The question clawed at me, relentless, and I kept seeing his face from that last night, the way he'd flinched when I raised my voice. Had I broken something in him? Or was it already broken? The kitchen table was a battlefield now, littered with letters and his sketches, each one a piece of the puzzle I couldn't solve. I wrote again, softer this time, begging him to tell me what he couldn't come back from. The silence was a tide, pulling me under, and I wondered if Lena knew his secret, if she'd seen the darkness in that half-open door. The voicemail played in my head, his "I love you," a lifeline I clung to, even as it slipped away. The truth was closer now, but it terrified me, a shadow I wasn't ready to face. Had I failed him in a way I couldn't yet see? The house creaked, the spring air heavy with the scent of rain, and I sat there, the sketchbook open, knowing the answers were out there, waiting in the dark. A package arrived, not a letter but a box, heavy with every word I'd sent to Elliot, unopened, my handwriting a chorus of pain staring back at me. A note from Lena was tucked inside. He's safe. He's not yours. Let him go." The words were a blade, and I sat at the kitchen table, spring rain tapping the window, my hands trembling as I tore through the envelopes. Each one was a wound. My pleas for him to come home returned like ashes, and I felt the silence tighten, choking me. I drove to Port Haven, the coastal town from the last postmark, where the air smelled of salt and regret. The road was a blur, my heart pounding with Lena's note. "He's not yours." What did she mean? The town was a grey sprawl, waves crashing against jagged cliffs, and I wandered its streets, clutching Elliot's photo. At a diner, its neon sign flickering, a waitress recognized him. "Sat there last week," she said, pointing to a corner booth. "Sketching, looking lost." My breath caught. He was here, but she didn't know where he'd gone. I sat in my car, the rain drumming, and wrote a final letter, not to mail, but to burn. "I love you, Elliot, wherever you are." The words were a release, my grief spilling onto the page as the sea roared outside. I found a cliff, the wind tearing at my hair, and lit a match, watching the paper curl into flames, ashes swirling into the dark. Lena's note echoed, "Let him go." But letting go felt like losing him forever. Had he chosen this? Or was he trapped? Back at the diner, I sipped coffee, the waitress's pity soft in her eyes. She'd seen him alone, his sketchbook open, his face hollow, like he'd lost something too. I kept seeing his note, "I'm sorry, Mum," and wondered what he couldn't come back from. The fight replayed, my voice sharp, his eyes shadowed, and I realized I'd missed the weight of his pain. Lena's words were a wall, but there was a crack. "He's safe." It was enough to keep me breathing, but not enough to stop the ache. The house waited, empty, the box of letters a monument to my failure. I sat at the table, the rain outside a mirror to my tears, and felt the truth hovering, just out of reach. Was he gone because of me? Or because of something I'd never understand? I stood on the edge of knowing, afraid to look over, but the ashes of that last letter carried a fragile hope that he was out there, alive, even if he wasn't mine. I stood on a windswept cliff in Port Haven, the sea churning below, and burned my last letter to Elliot, its ashes dancing into the dark. The spring rain had stopped, leaving the air sharp with salt, and I didn't find him, but I found something else, a fragile peace, or maybe just surrender. The silence was still there, a weight I'd carry forever, but it wasn't screaming anymore. It was a quiet ache, like a bruise I'd learned to live with. I tracked Lena down one last time, finding her in a diner, her eyes tired, shadowed with her own ghosts. "He's alive," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Struggling, but healing. He can't face you yet." She handed me his latest sketch, a lighthouse in a storm, its beam cutting through the dark, "For Mum," scrawled in the corner. I wept, not from loss, but from the relief of knowing he was out there, carrying my love in his own broken way. The sketch was a lifeline, proof he hadn't forgotten me. Back home, I stopped writing letters, the kitchen table no longer a battlefield. I started a journal instead, pouring my love into pages he might never read, each word a prayer for his peace. The house was still empty, the spring air heavy with lilacs, but I framed his sketch, its lighthouse a beacon in my heart. I kept seeing our last fight, my voice cutting, his eyes flinching, and realized love doesn't always mean holding on. Sometimes it means letting go, trusting he'd find his way. The box of unopened letters sat in a corner, a monument to my grief, But the sketch was my new truth. Lena's words, "He's not yours," still stung, but they held a gift. He was alive, fighting his demons, and that was enough. I walked to Lake Huron's shore in my mind, hearing his boyish laugh, and felt the weight lift, just a little. The silence wasn't gone, but it was softer, a whisper of hope in the dark. This isn't a story of answers, but of learning to love a ghost. It's about the ache of letting go, of trusting love to endure beyond reach. I framed his sketch, its lighthouse glowing, and knew I'd carry him always, even if he never came back. If you've ever let go of someone you couldn't hold, share your story below. Hit that like button, subscribe, and let's carry this ache together. I need to know how you survived, how you found peace in the silence. Because this is my heart, laid bare, and I'm not alone in this.